The story of Prince and Prince and Warner Brothers is so interesting because Prince is the echt example of what Warner Brothers considered itself to be about. That is, artist development. Even though Prince wasn't exactly the artist they were thinking of when they created that philosophy in the 60s and 70s, the way that Warner Brothers worked was, we want to sign geniuses and give them room to develop as geniuses. And if they have hits, that's great. Prince is signed as a teenager to a fairly rich, somewhat extravagant multi-album deal. By today's standards, it's insane. He hasn't proven himself. He lives in Minneapolis. He makes a kind of music that generally doesn't sell that much. It can do well on the R&B charts, but at that moment, Prince is signed in the 70s. Michael Jackson is really still a kid. There's no thought that he's going to be the huge pop success he becomes.
The relationship between Prince and Warner Brothers was never warm and fuzzy in the sense that he was never the kind of artist who would drop in the office and just hang out, or work the building, as we used to say, from a promotional marketing sense, walk around, bring flowers to the receptionists and flirt with the assistants. And I mean, he wasn't that guy. There were a lot of artists who did do that. They understood the edge that it gave them and the motivation it brought to the people who worked at the label on their behalf. That was something that Prince had absolutely no interest in. He may have at least grudgingly understood the need for it and just felt that, hey, that's what I hire you people for. Go work the building, do what you got to do. I don't care what you have to do. I don't care how you do it. You don't even need to report to me about it. I make music. I don't do that.
I don't think he has a very long attention span. Prince can get bored very easily. So I think that was probably part of the conflict between him and Warner Brothers, actually, is that you have a person who is vital, who is interested in getting ideas out immediately, because if they sit too long, they're going to die on the vine. And as an artist, I can completely understand that. But, you know, I can see the side of a corporation going, well, wait a minute. We have 1,300 other artists we got to deal with, you know, in this time frame. And we only have so many, you know, minutes a week. And so I just think, you know, it's a situation where, I mean, eventually they were going to have to part ways because Prince was just cranking it out. And they were like, well, what do we do with it? So, you know.
Prince was both prophetic and way ahead of his time when it came to understanding the effect that the digital age would have on the music industry. You must understand that this was a guy who was already looking for alternative means to market and promote music to the public because he was so dissatisfied with the old business model. We had a meeting, and this would have been 1990, 1991, where he called me in, and it was after he had delivered a record to Warner's and was frustrated because they weren't in a hurry to put out another record. Again, the subject matter had once again become the fact that he was too prolific in giving Warner's product too quickly. And in his frustration, he was expressing to me, you know, we've got to find another way to get music to the public. In fact, what if we went to late night television and did like these oldies packages that people sell, and we actually marketed a record on our own label to the public, and we just sold it by mail order. We just do television adverts late at night, and people write to post office box, whatever, and we sell it through the mail. And I said, yeah, that's great, except for one problem. You're under contract to Warner Brothers. You can't legally do that. Well, then it'll be your label. You do it. And we'll put a different name on it. Instead of Prince, we'll put something else. And I said, yeah, but they're not going to, Prince, they're not going to sit and let you do that. If you run a business, you can't allow that to happen. So put your Warner's hat on for a minute. Pretend you're Mo Austin. What would you do? You're going to get a cease and desist, and you're going to legally prevent us from doing that. Well, I don't care. We got to do it. And I said, furthermore, I'm president of a label that's a joint venture. I can't. You're going to have me in jail. I can't be part of that. Put it on my label. I create a label. I can't do that. Well, then put it in your wife's name. We'll call it Gwen Records. He was serious. And I knew then that he was going to figure out some way to beat the system. even if it wasn't legally acceptable, he was going to push the envelope. And of course, that became NPG Records. It became the record he made for that ended up coming out on NPG under the name of the band that was really a Prince record that Warner's had rejected.
I think when Prince changed his name, it was certainly damaging to his public image. You've always got a hardcore group of fans that are going to follow him wherever he goes, but then you've got a wider audience that he had a lot of salient points in what he was talking about when it came to artists' rights, when it came to things like, owning your master tapes. One of the things he kept saying, again, with the tricky slavery imagery, is if you don't own your masters own you, meaning that if he didn't own his master tapes, then Warner Brothers were always going to own him. But all of these salient points about artists' rights and about freedom for an artist to create and to present their work to the public kind of got lost in the name change and the name calling between him and Warner's. And it wasn't, kind of typical Prince. It wasn't well explained enough for people to be able to really get what he was trying to say, apart from on stage where it was more of a rant. But Prince has sort of shown time and time and again through Love Sexy and other projects that he does have high concept ideas that he doesn't necessarily explain clearly enough for people to really grasp what he's getting at there.
To me, he was the bad guy wearing slaves because I thought it was foolish. Now, I understand he was marketing himself as the victim, but somehow the guy who, as I said, he's the only slave who owned the plantation. He was not a victim. He was a guy who had sold millions and millions and millions of records through a record company that had indulged him with projects that were, in some cases, follies, and had stood by him. They had indulged him with the making of movies that arguably shouldn't have been made, i.e. Graffiti Bridge. And, had they profited from it? Of course, they're in a business. But, my God, it's like he wasn't a slave. His definition of slave was somebody who doesn't own his own masters. The fact is that from the beginning of time, master recordings are the equity in the recording industry. The record companies pay every cost that has to do with the making of those records. It's their reason for existing is to sell the product. If they don't own the product, they can't exist. Now, I understand that's a dated business model, that business model is now obsolete. That's why there's downloading. That's why there's self-produced records. The digital age has changed all that. And I get it. And I don't even want to argue the morality of it. Maybe there should have been a rule years and years and years ago that said that after 10 years, the ownership of a master reverts to the artist. I could live with that. But having worked for labels, I understand that up until the digital age, you needed a label. It was the only way to saturate the marketplace and get your music to radio, to the media, to the public. An artist couldn't do that. And if you're going to have to use these people to do that for you and to distribute the product, to manufacture it professionally, distribute it to the record stores efficiently, then they have to get paid. And if they're going to survive as an industry, then they have to have some equity. And the only equity was their artist contracts and the masters. So the argument that every artist should own all of their masters in perpetuity doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make mathematical sense. If you want that label to serve your needs, they have to get something in return. The negotiation with Warner's in '92 it played a role in me leaving Paisley Park because clearly Prince and I disagreed on where Paisley Park, the label, was going. It wasn't so much how much I would have been thrilled for him to get whatever he could get. He's my guy. I work for him, so I want him to have the biggest deal he can get, the most successful, profitable, lucrative, supportive deal he could get. My fear was the support part was eroding. I don't think he really cared about that because he was incredibly frustrated with the Paisley. Everybody was frustrated with Paisley Park, the label.
Well, I think at first Prince did seem like he might have brought the goods. He had so many successful side projects, and there was that period where you know, Prince was recording so many full albums that weren't even getting released, that were full of great material. He just had so much going on, it almost seemed like, you know, it was never going to run out. So you could understand Warner Brothers wanting to get in on this as well, and to sort of finance the label, to encourage more of these great selling projects to come out. There's one point where the Time Records were really challenging Prince's own records on the R&B charts for sort of chart status. As time went on, I think Warner Brothers realised what a dog Paisley Park was turning out to be, and they did try and keep him happy. They gave him a brand new office, they staffed it for him, but Prince never even entered this office space that they gave him, which kind of shows how disinterested Prince was in running it as a label. You know, Prince at that time was a musician, and he had ideas from a musicianly standpoint in the sort of late 80s with Paisley Park. He wasn't really interested in running a record label at that point, or certainly not running one how they quote unquote should be run.
We were all frustrated, and justifiably so. But what I kept pointing out to Prince was, this is a joint venture. We do have a responsibility to try to satisfy the other part of the joint, in this case, Warner's. And in his mind, that was kind of like, oh, you're for them now. And I'm saying, no, it's not adversarial. It shouldn't be. I realize that it is on a practical level sometimes, because we may say this record should get promotion and they may say it doesn't deserve it. That's adversarial. But as a company, as a mentality, as a business model, you can't approach it as adversary, because they're your partners. And inescapably, they're your partners. So if we're going to go forward, we kind of have to hold hands and figure out a way to work together. And I know that sounds very simplistic, but it's the truth. It's just the fundamental truth. And, you know, as an artist, he didn't really want to hear that. And I understood that about him. So it was kind of like, you know what? This isn't going anywhere. This label is not going to work, because you're not going to give it the kind of product that they want from it. They are inescapably our partner in this. And it just became abundantly clear that we had entirely different concepts of what the business model for Paisley Park Records should be. And as a result, the joint venture was doomed to fail. So what's the roadkill going to be, and how is that going to affect Prince and his future? Because at the end of the day, I wasn't with them, I was with him. And so I was concerned about how that was going to play out and how it was going to affect him. And because of the renegotiation of his own contract, those concerns for Paisley Park Records kind of got pushed to the rear burner.
The changes that were happening at Warner Brothers in the early 90s and came to a head in the mid-90s, it was a power struggle at the top. Warner Brothers had been the ultimate boutique label for a couple of decades, since the late 60s, early 70s, under the regime of President Mo Austin, who was an older, I think he was an accountant, actually, originally for Frank Sinatra in the 50s. But Mo turned out to be possibly the most amazing and best and most effective, if not necessarily the most successful, record label president in history. Warner Brothers had a whole culture that was very artist-friendly, and they just had hit after hit after hit after hit. You know, I mean, Fleetwood Mac's Fleetwood Mac's Rumors was at the time the biggest selling record in history. The Eagles' Greatest Hits was also a Warner release. That was the biggest selling release in history. But owing mostly to egos, I would say, a power struggle was taking place at Warner Brothers, where the three labels were Warner Brothers, Elektra, and Atlantic, and ultimately over the next couple of years, the top executive of Atlantic got promoted over Mo Austin, and Mo was not accepting of that. So this played out with, you know, costing the label millions and millions and millions of dollars over the next 3 years or so, and I would say it's never really recovered from it. And it's very sad, because they had the most successful record company in the world, and they basically destroyed it.
It's interesting to note that when Warner Brothers started releasing Prince material after Prince had left the label, there tends to be a bit of a correlation between when Prince has got his own project coming out and when Warner Brothers released their project. So when Prince released Emancipation under the symbol name, Warner Brothers released Chaos and Disorder, a sort of, album from the vaults that Prince had left them, kind of under the Prince name, to try and challenge the symbol brand. Later on, when Prince released Raven to the Joy Fantastic, Warner Brothers released the Vault Old Friends for Sale album, another compilation from the vaults, sort of try and challenge what Prince is doing. And you could also see that with Best Of. So in '93 they released the first Best Of, and it gets a load of rave reviews. Everyone talks about, I think one quote was how this isn't just a world of pop, this is a whole entire galaxy of pop. It consolidates Prince's career, shows all the great things he's done, and it draws attention away from the new stuff that he's trying to promote, new stuff he's trying to put out. Again, they do it in 2006 with Ultimate Prince came out at the same time as Prince had 3121 album coming out on Universal. So you could sort of see Warner Brothers kind of, if Prince is doing something, they're trying to do something to maybe distract or at least sort of, ride the coattails of whatever Prince is doing.